Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm your host, Daniel Davis. Joining us here on the program today is author of two marvelous books, Alchemy of the Heart and The Presence Process. It's about time that even as though we're approaching our midlife, that we start living in the here and now instead of going to where we should be in the future and where we should have done something different in the past. I'd like to welcome to our program today our special guest, Michael Brown. Michael, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
You're very welcome.
Now, let's talk about how you came to create this book. What was going on in your life that you found that this could be a very profound gift to the world of being in the present?
Well, for me, before that, I was probably a master of distraction. But what happened to me was, sorry, I have a bit of a cold at the moment. I got into a situation in my life where I had a lot of pain, and I went the normal routes of trying to do something about it with conventional medicine. And then I eventually realized what the nature of my condition was and that I wasn't going to really get help from conventional medicine. So then I started looking at unconventional medicine or alternative medicine and a lot of fringe therapies and things, and then entered the metaphysical world. And it was only really when I discovered the impact of the emotional realm on my own experience that I started coming towards this work, which is the work of the presence process, which assists us to go to the childhood situation of our life and to resolve the emotional stuff there that's impacting us currently as an adult. So for myself, that's the journey that I had to take to discover how all that unfolds.
Now, why is it so difficult for us to kind of release or let go of these past traumas that seem to become like chains in our lives that bind us?
Well, the one thing is that we're not aware of them, so it's very difficult to let go of something that we're not aware of because the emotional trauma is happening inwardly in a felt experience. For most of us as adults, where we're experiencing it is really in the physical, mental aspect of our experience. That's where we're seeing it reflected. And so most of our behavior is around trying to do something or think something to resolve the situation that we're in. So I'd say that's one of the primary things is that we can't actually see them within ourselves. We see it as reflections in the world. So that has to be brought into awareness first before we can even start going inwardly and touching on these.
Now, it sounds to me that you actually became physically sick as a result of these unaware, I guess, thoughts that were going on with inside of yourself. What was it that you were able to do where you began to uncover these things?
Well, I won't say it was because of the thoughts, because in my own experience, when I traced myself back to a time where I probably wasn't involved too much in mental activity, it was mostly in the feeling of what was going on around me. Mm-hmm. So it's actually about going on beneath the thinking, because, for example, when a child is impacted with a traumatic experience and the child is not doesn't have words like abandonment and grief and stuff like that, it's still having the experience, but it's having it on a felt level. And so what I discovered in my own experience was that when I first tried to do things physically for myself, then mentally tried to affect my thinking. But it was only when I went in to look at the authentic condition of my own emotional body and realized what was going on in there, which was a lot of fear, but for me, immense amount of rage, and underneath the rage, grief. Only when I started bringing those energetic circumstances to some sort of resolution did my painful condition, which was a neurological condition, did it start to subside and eventually integrate. And so I started to trace the impact of these unintegrated emotional signatures, of these felt experiences, we could say, that haven't digested, and on the symptoms that I was having in my current experience.
As you have brought these books out, how have people been, I guess, coming to you about these things? I mean, they must be thinking, is it really this simple?
Well, the thing about this work, of the emotional work, is it actually is very, very simple. But it does take us through complex experiences. So, for example, it's simple in that if I just allow myself to feel my emotional state, and I allow those emotions to move organically, that they will come to resolution. That's all that's asked of me, is to allow that to take place. But when I do enter a procedure or something that is going to bring that stuff to my awareness, it is going to become a bit of a complex experience for a while, because I'm not normally accustomed to feeling my fear, my anger, and my grief as it is. And that's why, this book is done in a self-facilitating procedure, so that one can approach this, compassionately, consistently, and responsibly, and also learn to identify what unfolds as we uncover memory. Because often when we uncover childhood memory, for example, we are assuming that the memory is going to be pictures or thoughts taking place in our head. But when we can uncover deep-seated memories, they can come up as the way people are behaving around us, or our interpretations of that, of the way people behave in events and how we react to those. So it's important for us to be shown how to recognize that and work with that. So there are complexities in working through the emotional realm, because really what we're doing is we're working with energy. But it's actually very, very simple work. The work itself isn't very difficult at all.
I know it seems interesting in this day and age, Michael, that we live in this world full of distraction, and we kind of probably come to wonder why it is that we have created such distraction. There's radio, there's television, there's now all these networking communities, for crying out loud. And it gives you the feeling sometimes that authenticity is kind of becoming a commodity that people think they can just kind of toss aside at their convenience or have when they decide they want it.
Well, the mental idea of authenticity is, you see, when one is more in a mental, physical place, we think of authenticity as a way that I should physically behave, or the way that I should think about things. And if I behaved in those particular ways, I would be an authentic person. When we do this emotional work, authenticity comes from the fact is, if I'm angry but I'm behaving in a nice way, then I am being inauthentic. In other words, if I'm not in some way tuning in with my current emotional experience or my current felt experience and containing an awareness of it, I don't necessarily have to tell stories about it and project it onto other people. But if I'm not functioning from an awareness of that, it is likely that I'm being inauthentic without even knowing I'm being inauthentic. Mm-hmm. So when I get angry, it's authentic to be angry, but it's not recommended to project that anger onto others or to listen to the stories anger tells. And authenticity in this work comes out of being authentic with the current condition of my own emotional body and responding to that. That's what I found in my experience leads me into what we call authenticity.
Now, in your book, you lay out what would be called, I guess, a 10-week process. Could you describe for our listeners what that is?
The process works on what I call the pathway of awareness. And the pathway of awareness identifies the way awareness moves as we enter an experience of this world. And a very simple way to explain that is when a child is born, it doesn't start chatting or running around the room. It's emotional. Its first state is emotional. And then it's allowed to be in that emotional state until about 7, at which time it starts entering a very intense mental development of schooling till around 14, and then there's sort of physiological changes in that experience of that individual, and then they start going into a very physical experience as in what do they do in this world and how do they get to do that. So there's a pathway of awareness that moves from the emotional of the child, as you could say, the mental of the teenage years, into the physical life of the adult. And so when we want to go back to the emotional experience where our initial imprinting or emotional unintegrated emotions are planted, when we reverse that pathway, it makes it much easier for us to access that. So we first, become physically present in the body, and then we get mentally clear, and then have the mental clarity, and only then enter the emotional realm. It makes the journey much more efficient. And what the presence process does is it gently enables us not only to reverse that pathway of awareness in ourselves, but to gradually enter deeper into our experience. So we may first encounter our unintegrated memories as physical things for a while, and then it will become up as mental, as thought patterns we can identify, but finally we work our way deeper into the emotional realm. And as we do that, the procedure assists us to integrate the experience we're having through things like breathing, to keep us focused with what I call present moment responses, But generally, and the text to keep us focused on that when we have emotions coming up, that we're able to stay as conscious as possible, be as consistent as possible in compassionately bringing them to resolution. So the procedure supports that journey into ourselves, teaches us how to do the work, and in a way frees us up to be able to do that work with ourselves because it's self-facilitation.
Do people ever find themselves thinking, I don't know if I'm ready to see these darker angels of myself?
Yes. Well, the movement through the emotional realm is also along the pathway of awareness. And so what happens is when we enter the emotional realm, one of the very first things that come up is our fear. And that's how you know pretty much when you're entering the emotional realm for the first time to do the work, is there is fear that comes up. But often the fear is actually the fear of our own anger or our own rage, because if we think that if we let all that out, that we'll destroy our world. Also, the anger that we come across within ourselves at a very primal level is about having our hearts broken. As children, coming in as unconditional beings, but not being treated unconditionally. So there's different levels of it. So yes, it can be, but I also trust that people come to this work when they're ready to it. It's not work that you can thrust on someone. So, for example, I could never tell you to go and deal with your fears if you weren't ready to look at your own fears. There's just no ways that you would do that. And it's the same thing with this book. A person will buy this book and will deeply resonate with it and think, okay, now I can sort out all my family problems, and buy 6 copies and give it to their whole family. And most of the people will read the first few pages and go, well, this is just not for me, and put it down. So the book, in a way, will determine who comes to it.
Yeah. In other words, weeding out the people who would rather just stay weak in some ways.
No, I don't think it's a case of just staying weak. I think that the evolving into full-blown emotional awareness or felt perception is the same as a flower that's blooming. So it's a blooming process that happens in someone. So, for example, people are in a very physical place first. Even as an evolving species, we can see this. We're first in a very physical place in our reality, whether it's where it's fire and companion and breeding and shelter, and then we move from that into a more mental place where we start looking at tools and communication systems and organizations of how we live. And then we only move into emotional awareness as part of our evolution, where we learn about felt perception, which is where we are now as human beings. And so there are many people moving into that, and there are many people still very much in a mental place. And we can look at across the planet too and see that there are many people still very much in a physical place. So it's not that everyone has to do this work, and that those who don't, it is something that they're not ready, that they're not good at or something. It's not really from that level. It's just that they haven't, they're flowered into doing that emotional work yet.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating too, Michael, is the fact that in the book, The Presence Process, is you outline a key factor that you see consistently around the world, especially when it comes to becoming emotionally liberated, if you will, and that is meditation. And I mean, here it is, a relatively simple tool that's very consistent around the world for spiritual development as well as emotional integration as well.
Yes.
Why is that?
Can you reframe, why is what? Can you just rephrase that question about meditation?
Yeah, why is it that meditation, as simple as it is so profound on the journey toward emotional integration and creating that moment of being right here now?
The meditation falls into the vibrational part of the journey, which we can say when we're in the womb, we're in the vibrational part of our journey because we can only be, and we're kind of in the vibrations of our mother's body. So metaphorically, that's a vibrational. Then we enter the emotional of childhood, the mental of teenage years, and finally the very physical, mental physical state we get into as adults. When we reverse that journey, our intent really is to regain vibrational awareness while we're in the physical. On some level, to be in the world but not of it, to be in the physical world but to be spiritually connected, however we want to say. And so a lot of us aim at that through meditation, and the meditation is a practice that that will bring us back into vibrational awareness, and that is there's peace and stillness and quiet and space and in that vibrational environment. But what happens is when we do practices that bring us into that peace, stillness, vibration, what we're going to become aware of is where we are not that way currently within ourselves because of the emotional conflict. So most practices that move us towards vibrational awareness, meditation practices, will along the way bring up the emotional, and to me that's the wiser, because I'm not a vibrational teacher or a meditation teacher, but to me a way of recognizing a very wise meditation teacher is one that opens a space for the emotions to come up and teaches how to resolve them through containment rather than projecting them out into the world, and realizing that part of the journey of meditation is to bring up those unintegrated emotions so that they can be resolved.
Now, one of the things that I found really interesting is I was reading the book in the Presence Process, is that you say that the Presence Process is not about changing who or what we are. That's impossible. It's about releasing our attachment to our manufactured identity.
Right.
That there is huge. I mean, you kind of wonder how many of us this day and age are walking around with identities that we just sort of jigsawed together that really aren't who we are. I could see where the frustration would be.
Yes, well, and remember that the expression that we are in the world by the time we become adults is manufactured, a lot of it, not most of it, because much of it is manufactured out of expressions from the vibrational. But a large part of our expression as human beings is manufactured out of that emotional imprint, as in a way of trying to sedate our awareness, or control or sedate it, or remove an awareness of that felt experience from the childhood and replacing it with a different feeling so that behaviors engage with that, and almost trying to quest a thirst or a hunger that can't be quested by whether we manipulate the world around us or accumulate things or whatever we do to try and feel better. And so that's why this work is not about trying to feel better, but rather getting better at feeling. Right. And that's when the emotional realm awakens up to us, when we realize that. So yes, we have this manufactured aspect of ourselves, and what happens, what is also tricky when we do the emotional work, is to realize that that part of ourselves is going to dismantle, even though it's very familiar to us, and we're almost deeply attached to it, even though it's uncomfortable. Its behavior and its way of being in the world is uncomfortable to us, because we know it so much. We're attached to it and find it familiar, but it also goes through dismantling as it goes through this emotional work. And then we start to more express the attributes of the vibrational as opposed to the distorted emotional. And the attributes of the vibrational are more about stillness and peacefulness and silence and space and the compassion that comes with those resonances.
Now, Michael, it must be fascinating to you that as people read this book, The Presence Process, and they go about doing the outlined activities that you have in your book, what kind of, I guess, response do people get? I could just see them going, I just have never experienced life like this before. What does that look like?
And the thing about the Presence Process is that it doesn't dictate an experience that someone is going to have. What it does is it validates the experience we're already having. And to me, that's like more than half the battle in moving forward, into a more evolved way of being on the planet. Is we first have to start by validating the experience we are having, as opposed to trying to have another experience we think we're supposed to have. Right. And so the wonderful thing about the Presence Process is it enlivens the experience we are having and shows us how the mechanics of that experience are put together and how we may navigate ourselves accordingly to start to impact it from the point of the quality of the experience, not the quantity, but the quality, which is the felt aspect of the experience. And it also gives us a vocabulary whereby we can engage with the emotional realm, which is very challenging to have a vocabulary whereby we can engage with energetic circumstances. So it's wonderful. I get wonderful responses from people, and I have for many years, that have found that the process brings them what they require as opposed to dictating an experience to them. And the new version of the book, which has just come out in the last couple of weeks, is even more efficient at assisting us to validate our own experience as opposed to pointing us to an experience. To become very present in the experience we are having and to digest the teachings that come to us from our own experience. That alone is very empowering.
When it comes to change and adaptability, would you say this really helps people become more elastic?
But less reactive, because it diminishes the amount of reactivity and the ability to respond. So a reactive person is more like a very brittle twig that won't bend in the wind and can be snapped. Mm-hmm. A responsive person is more like a subtle green reed that will bend in the wind in circumstances and actually gain strength from it and have a great ride in it. So when we live in a responsive way, life is very different from when we live as if what's happening is not supposed to be happening. You know, living in a responsive way says that whatever is happening in my life now is valid and required. How do I respond to it from a causal point? Living in a reactive way, saying whatever is happening in my life at the moment is not supposed to be happening. I want something else, and I'm going to manipulate the circumstances around me to make that happen. And they lead to two completely different outcomes of experience. Mm-hmm. And so what the presence process does is it's a way of training ourselves to live responsibly every day, not to get to a destination point where it goes, everything's okay and there's nothing I have to do anymore, but how do I get up every day and live in response to what is happening in my life as a way of being in the world, not something that I get up and do and I'm hoping to finish one day, but as a way of being. How do I live in response to my world internally? Because as I do so internally, it will be reflected externally. So if I'm able to live in peaceful response to my world internally, I will be able to live a peaceful response outwardly. If I invalidate my own internal experience, I will go around invalidating everyone else's experience in the world and telling them they should be having a different one because I'm doing that to myself. So what the presence process does shows us all of this and how to live, from that point of response.
Mm-hmm. I was on your website, or on the Namaste Publishing website, which talks about the presence process, and I was reading the reviews, and one of the ones that kind of stood out at me here that I kind of found interesting, because especially this day and age, especially with people in America, it says, "I am just so restless with this garbage in my head, I'm ready to dump it all and just be. I don't know how to live without it. Every day that I can remember has had some kind of anxiety attached to it. Why do I need limitation? Why do I need any kind of conflict?"
Yeah. And that's the whole thing, is moving from the just dumping it mentality to realizing it's not garbage, it's actually jewels. Because when I enter my emotional realm and I resolve my integrated emotional stuff from childhood, I simultaneously develop capacities to engage directly with the vibrational, because the vibrational realm, say we say pieces of the vibrational. In order to engage consciously with the state of peace, I have to be able to feel deeply, because peace is a feeling, it's not a thinking. It's not a doing, it's a feeling. And so as I enter my own emotional realm and I allow myself to feel my fear and my anger and my grief and to feel it as valid experiences, what happens is I simultaneously reawaken and develop my capacity to feel. And as I do that, I'm able to feel other things, like I can feel the spaciousness of being in on a planet. I can feel the quietness of being in this emptiness of this universe. I can feel the peacefulness that's always here. And those attributes are beautiful to feel and bring into the experience, because they're already there in the chaotic experience that is happening around us on the planet, whether it's chaos from weather changes or from human behavior. In the midst of that chaos, the peace and the stillness, and it is still equally available to me if I have the capacity to feel it. And that's what doing the emotional work does, is it endows me with the capacity to feel the things that I think I have to do something, think or try and figure out how to make happen. It gives me the capacity to feel them directly as an experience, and that, again, enlivens my human experience.
Mm-hmm. It's really fascinating, because you hear this particular quote thrown around quite often, and that is that a problem persists until you actually, deal with it or come to terms with it. And right. I know that in your book you were talking about that in the first 7 years of our lives that we really spend pretty much the rest of our lives recycling this stuff until we get it. Now, as you have these experiences that create an emotional response or a trigger, These are the moments that you suggest or that you say to move into, because those will clearly give you the answers and the ways of healing from the heart.
Absolutely. You said it absolutely perfectly. And that's the thing, is we don't have to go back to our childhood. We have to go into our childhood. It's within us. Mm-hmm. It's not behind us. And so whenever something happens in the world that triggers me uncomfortably on an emotional level, what that is an indicator that an unintegrated aspect from that first 7 years of imprinting is right at the surface of my awareness, to the point that something in the world can reflect it and I can feel it deeply within myself. Normally what we do when I get emotionally upset in that way and I don't realize I'm actually being emotionally set up, normally what I would do is tell myself a story about what's happening and why it happened, and then react out of that story to what's going on in my life. And that's a kind of revolutionary behavior, because revolution says what it says. You begin at one point, you come back to the same point. You just revolve and revolve. And so that projective behavior, whenever I have those upsets coming up, is revolutionary. But evolutionary behavior is very different. That the emotional work, where I use the physical world, the event that upset me, and the story that I'm telling as a means to gain access to the felt aspect of the experience within me. And I bring awareness to that and allow that experience to be there and see where I'm controlling and stopping and pushing it away at it or resisting it, and allow myself to relax around it. And that experience then moves within me as an energy and comes to a point of resolution organically. And what happens is it shifts what's happening in the outside world that was, you could say, irritating, annoying me originally. So it's shifting the outside world by shifting internally. Mm. I can spend a lot of time shifting the outside world without making any internal changes. Mm. And what the emotional realm shows is the point at which to make those internal causal adjustments that are impacting the quality of our experience is done internally. And so we're shown how to do that.
It's fascinating that you bring that up, Michael, especially in a day when everybody's flinging around quantum physics as though it was the next cookie of the day.
Right.
And what's funny about that is that you see this whole realm of self-help, and I've heard this consistently from people who may be, people who work in psychology or therapy or whatever the case is, and they say, it's interesting to go out and you get this book in the hopes that it'll change your life as it is now, which we all want a better life. We want to be happy as much as possible. But the fact is they say, well, that generally worked for the person who was writing the book, but until someone can get in touch with that conscious and even unconscious self, it's just going to seem like a linear process that's going to end up with really little to no benefit for the end user. Do you find that to usually be true?
Well, this is the beauty of having the experiential work, because if there's no experiential work, and when I say experiential work, I mean if there is no emotional, mental, and physically integrated encounter with the subject matter in a way that I am experiencing what is written on those pages, I have the chance to have an experience whereby I can reflect on what's being written in this book, then to me it just stays in the mental plane, and I'm not probably going to think about it a lot and have some understandings, and it may lead me to another body of knowledge that I may now start to study in that. What the presence process does is say, here's an experience. You jump into this experience. Once you've had the experience, you literally have you have an experiential working encounter with what's written in the text. And that's one of the things about this procedure, is that people do it 3, 4, 5 times, because when they go back to do it again, they now have a deeper awareness of what the work is about and can go deeper and deeper. And so I've not yet found people who said this did nothing for me, because the process is not supposed to do anything for you other than bring your awareness to the validity of your own experience, the one that's already happening. So in case, is this book supposed to create an experience for me, etc., etc.? No, absolutely not. Mm-hmm. It's supposed to teach me how to interact directly with my experience. And anyone who does this work is going to engage with themselves on a deeply felt level, and something will definitely happen, and they will know something's happened, and they will either respond to that and go, this is the sort of work that I'm very interested in doing for myself, or they might react to it and say, no, I'm not ready, and actually put it down somewhere along the way and go, I'm not ready for this. And I trust that the book is written in a way that it makes that possible.
Well, it's always great when there's an opportunity for anyone to get out there and finally bring themselves into the moment. And just to give our listeners an idea, when you feel that anxiousness, you just don't know what it is, those ruminating thoughts. Once those seem to be, I guess, put at bay, you just kind of find yourself content and pretty reasonably happy a lot of the times, and you just really can't put your finger on it.
Yes, I describe the emotional work like chopping a really, really big tree. And so, initially it's chopped, and you see splinters, you see changes in the quality of the experience, and chop until there's a cracking, and there's a sudden shift that it almost feels given or received as opposed to anything I accomplished with all my chopping. But it feels, because it's so sudden, and once that shift happens, and there's been a deep shift in the emotional realm, it's irreversible. And there's not only a shift internally in how I feel about things, but I notice there's also a shift in the way I'm relating to the world and the way the world's interacting with me. And the thing about doing this process is once one goes through and sees that I do within myself as I would have people accomplish in the world, or, I be the way I expect people to be in the world. If I want people to be peaceful, I'm the one who's, when we actually see that in an experiential way and we have a practical way of applying those principles and seeing them work in our life, it generally makes us hungry to know, how deep one goes into that hole, into that rabbit hole.
Well, again, both of the books, we have Alchemy of the Heart and The Presence Process, and our guest today, Michael Brown. Is there a website people can go and find out more about your work?
Yes. The website is called The Presence Portal, and it's about, the majority of the website is free access to audios, written material, visuals, and so one can go and do a lot of research on the work itself before actually entering the work experientially through the book. There's plenty of other techniques and procedures that are shared on that website that people can start with straight away and to explore themselves emotionally. So the Presence Portal. And also Namaste Publishing to find out, what's happening with the book is a good website to go to. It's the publisher.
Well, Michael Brown, it's been a pleasure to have you on the program today, and there is hope to get comfortable in your own skin.
Absolutely. And thank you very much for giving this work a voice on your program.
You bet, not a problem. So we encourage you to go and visit us at our website as well, which is beyond50radio.com, and we'll have information about the Presence Process and Alchemy of the Heart so that you can directly find those websites and utilize them as well. And like I said, folks, it's really fascinating to feel what it's like to be able to live in your own skin and just feel content that right now is not too bad, actually. Pretty fantastic. So it's beyond50radio.com. That's our website with the number 50. Sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter as well. We thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.